Theory is a way of making decisions based on what the people around you are doing, what you know about them, and what they know about you. It is the way one person's actions can affect those of others and how this can be good or bad for all who are involved. Using examples from the game we played here and a case study from an Australian business, this process will be explained. Two important features of game theory are reward and influence. For a situation to be counted as game theory, all participants must have the opportunity for reward. A bet based on the actions of one person, for example, whether or not they can swim a kilometre in less than half an hour, is not game theory, because the only person with the possibility to win is the one swimming. Either they can or they can't, but their actions don't affect that of someone else. The bet was based on who can swim a kilometre fastest. Each person's actions would affect the other. Participants have the opportunity for reward. An example of this from the game is trading. If red wants a city, needing ore and wheat, and blue wants a settlement, needing brick, wood, sheep, and wheat, they each have resources they are willing to trade for. But say red was only willing to trade ore for the wheat they needed. Blue would suddenly lose whatever reward they may have gained from the trade. But say white wants a city too and is willing to trade their wheat for red's ore. They can both gain from the trade. Influence is also important to game theory. If a person has no influence, they cannot impact other people, and so it is not game theory. When a person in a game theory situation loses some or all of their influence, it becomes hard for them to impact the actions of others. For example, in the game that was played, when the robber was moved and the number it was on was rolled, it became much harder for the person whom the robber was on to influence the game. When this happened a number of times in a row, it made it even more difficult for that person to influence the game, and at the same time, the reward became harder and harder to attain. Another game in which this is the case is the Chairman's Game, or Mao. In this game, a few players begin with significantly more influence than the majority of players, meaning that those who haven't played the game before start off with a disadvantage. In this game, it is almost always the case that the chairman will win first, and if not them, then someone who has played before. In this game and others, one can clearly see that the amount of influence a person has is often a big part of their chances of reaching the reward. It's all well and good, but how does game theory come into our lives outside of the games we play? One example of this from an Australian business is Atlassian buying out Trello. Trello has a product that is worth a certain amount to them, and Atlassian has a number of products of various values that are each made more valuable by each other. Trello stood to gain their reward in the form of money for their product, and Atlassian stood to gain the reward of that product. Trello knew that under the ownership of Atlassian, their product would become more valuable and bring in more money than if it were owned by any other company. This meant that they would be willing to pay more for the product than another company. Trello's knowledge and Atlassian's money gave them both influence over the other, and they could both use that influence to impact the other's next step. It is worth also noting that game theory does assume that all participants are rational and that they want the reward. In the example of Mao, some players aren't playing to win anymore. When they realize that they don't have influence, they use the tiny bit of influence that they have, often the knowledge that talking receives a card, and that's a punishment, to intentionally gain cards to the point where no one else can play anymore either. By doing this, they don't really gain any influence of their own, but they do take away the influence of others and make it harder for everyone else to play. In short, game theory can be helpful for decision making, but it does rely on you playing within its rules.